kind. You're very kind. Okay, so
Dr. Jacobs, pleasure to meet you.
My pleasure. Thank you for joining us.
I'm present. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Hello.
hey, Ameenah,
How
how are you?
Good to see you.
Lovely seeing you again.
Thank
Lovely
you.
seeing.
Thank
I
you.
am so sorry. What is happening with this tanker of oil next
Oh
to your
my
beautiful
goodness. I mean,
beaches?
today has been a total disaster, Ismail. Is that the tanker hit? The oil spillage started on the 6th of August, and today we have over 30 dolphins which are dead on our coast. This is heartbreaking.
Yeah.
I don't know. This is a total carnage. And this could have been avoided, all right? It could have been avoided if those at the helm had taken the right decision at the right time. But we are where we are. We've got thousands of tons of oil, which is now in our waters. And yeah, low-grade sulfur oil for which no impact assessment has been done yet. So we are completely, literally at sea of knowing what the impact is going to be when this, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons start splitting on the UV light, and what residual chemicals will be left after this, we don't know. So it's a disaster.
But the country should certainly sue the company for compensation and damages for what they've done to the environment.
Yes.
I remember there's a precedent way back when Exxon Valdez.
Yes.
Exxon Valdez, they wanted to get away with minor things, saying, well, there was nobody at the coast, et cetera, et cetera. They forced them to pay $500 million additional compensation for punitive damages because of destroying the environment.
Mm.
Yeah, there's an equally potent lesson from that, is they actually had a judgment for, I think, $7 billion. And unfortunately, they found it less expensive to have attorneys tied up in court literally for decades. Most of it has still not been paid out.
Mm. Yeah.
Very unfortunate.
Yeah, I'm sure that the battle will start soon. But unfortunately, I'll say this, of course, amongst ourselves, the government here is also to blame, because they should have stopped that as soon as it came into our waters. And, it's one of the biggest ships. It's the size of an aircraft carrier. It's among the 1% biggest ship vessel which have been built. And how it ended up on our reef, into our economic zone, into our territorial waters, and nobody stopped them. I mean, these are the questions now we are grappling with. This should have been done. So, it's a terrible time.
Hi, Professor Yunus. How are you?
Hi, hello, hi.
I have just downloaded Brave, which is an alternative. It's a shift in thinking, looking towards the future. It says take back control of your data, etc. But what's interesting is it's crypto powered, and they give these little awards for opting into their system. If you give attention, your valuable attention to ads, you actually get these kind of little tokens, which you can share back to the content creators whose sites you're interested in.
I think we're being audio bombed.
On Linux.
Someone
Audio bombed. Okay, but we are about ready to go. I think we are missing.
Starting to use that.
That is the beautiful Mila. Mila.
Good to see you all. Pleasure to have you all here.
Okay. And let's see, we are waiting for Mats is here, right, Mats? Hi.
Yes, hello.
David Nabarro. David Nabarro is not here yet. And we have David and Petre Roman, Prime Minister of Romania. And we still have a couple of minutes anyway, so to be fair. Nobody's late yet.
Wonderful to see everybody smiling. Roshan, congratulations again. We did it. Very good.
There's never a doubt, Mila.
Very good, very good. So I'll probably take my picture off. Roshan, I'm in the background if you need me. Is that okay?
Whatever you wish. It's always a pleasure to see your face.
Yes.
Bless your company, Mila.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
If you could tell us about the progress on the General Assembly resolution on COVID-19. How is it progressing? How is your plans progressing?
That's the question for Professor Yunus.
Yeah. Well, we just sent out. We have not got much of response yet. See, they're handling it at the Foreign Office level. Some said they sent it to their permanent mission. So we'll see how it shapes up. It's a complicated structure. Yeah. Go ahead.
I sent you respond, Dr. Yunus.
Yes, yes.
President of Montenegro already ordered to its mission in President Ivanovic.
That's right. That's true.
In the UN,
in the UN, yeah.
And to be one of the hosts of this.
Very good. Wonderful.
Wow.
Good to know that. We'll see how others respond.
Back home. Full circle back home, Roshan. You keep sending me back home.
Yeah.
Everything we do, I've been in the US for 25 years now. Everything we do,
but
it's Montenegro.
Taking you back to Montenegro. Listen, we'll give another, I propose we give another minute and then we'll start and then the other can, somebody's connecting right now.
Thomas Kimlich.
We might have to, depending on what the panel wants to do, but we might have to start. I know that David Nabarro is
yes, leaving quickly. No, we'll give him a chance to speak in the first part.
I will actually make sure that I get in contact with him in the background as well.
Ismail, we can start already.
Okay. Okay, let me start. Welcome, everybody. We are here to discuss a strategy for global food security. And this is one of two panels that are meeting today. It's a collective effort with the Yunus Center, the World Academy of Arts and Sciences, and the Nizami Ganjavi International Center. I'm proud to be asked to moderate this panel. And I'll just start by setting out a few parameters in general. That there has been a number of declarations since the COVID disaster. There's no other word for it, considering the economic impacts of the lockdowns, the contraction, the number of people who lost their jobs, and so on. And there have been a number of statements, and I think we agree with most of them. But the fact is that although the COVID-19 pandemic is a major health crisis, the food systems around the world have also been under great stress. Consumers in many countries are paying higher prices, supply chains have been disrupted, and children who do not go to school have also lost their school lunches and other forms of support that they were getting nutritionally and otherwise. And the estimate now is that 150 million students are losing that benefit. And let's face it, that achieving the SDGs generally will require special attention to agriculture and to the rural world, in particular, the promotion of food and nutrition security in terms of the quality of the food, not just the quantity of the food. There is a lot that's happening on science, technology, and innovation, including actually last week in Science, there was a report on chimeric plants that can grow twice as much crops, eggplants on the top and potatoes in the roots, or tomatoes on top. But there's a lot of other things. The key point is that whatever technologies are being developed, they have to go from lab to farmer very quickly, benefit the farmer, and then from farmer to consumer very quickly. And these supply chains have become problematic because of the poor infrastructure in many of the poorest countries. We need to get better quality nutrition, and I think that is in terms of the quality of the food. And then we need also to move towards precision agriculture to be able to cope with climate change effects of rainfall, variability of rainfall, dry zones, as well as to cope with the disruptions of input supplies. And on the input supplies, and this is my friend Muhammad Yunus, of course, is the guru of gurus on that. Do not forget, it's not just the seeds, the equipment, the livestock, it's also credit. It's also credit for the farmers, the poorest farmers require credit. And on top of all of that, this is coming at this result when the developing countries have no ability to do rescue packages of the kind that the Europeans are doing or the Americans are doing in the trillions of dollars. I mean, I was on another panel recently just debating, and I said it is insulting that the rich countries are putting together something like $11 trillion of stimulus packages for their own citizens. And then they say to the poorest developing countries, yeah, among other things, you owe us $11 billion, so we will postpone that by 6 months. I mean, come on, you're putting $11 trillion for your own citizens. And for the poorest countries, because of what they're going to say, we shall postpone collecting on $11 billion in debt. I mean, this is really the inequities that are built into this global system. It really need major attention. And this is an occasion when I think we could do something, and I hope that the UN will pay attention to the proposals that are before it right now. And they propose to have a summit next year. So much of what we do can be seen as leading into that. Now, having sort of laid that foundation, I will add one very nasty thing because I can't resist it. You know that I have spent a good deal of my life in the World Bank, and I'm an economist, among other things. People have to ask themselves, how is it that we have the worst real economy in 100 years, and the stock market is going up? The stock market is going, the delinking of the stock market from the real economy is unbelievable. I mean, you have 40 million people out of work in the United States. You got queues of people trying to get food from food banks, and the S&P 500 is reaching the highest peak ever. Well, it turns out part of it is due to the fact that much of the money that was given to the corporations was not spent on investment. In fact, it is lying in depository institutions in the banks, and the banks themselves, even though we are at a very low interest rate or almost zero interest rate everywhere, do not have borrowers who want to borrow money to invest because everybody is nervous about what the economy will be like 6 months, 12 months from now. So as a result of that, you end up having the banks speculating in the stock market and pushing the stock market up. And I also learned yesterday that since January of this year, the richest 15 people in the United States added to their personal wealth $270 billion. 15 individuals. My friend Muhammad, the floor is yours.
Thank you. You said it all. That's the way. That's the way world is moving. Just I want to mention what you mentioned about my credential about the credit. I was going to about credit. I would make it a little wider. I would say income. The moment you talk about food, to me, it sounds income, because most of the famine in the world is caused not because of the shortage of food in the country, is the lack of purchasing power in the hands of the people. Shops are full, there's food there, but people couldn't buy it. They have no money. So this is the most critical thing that, and also the pandemic has revealed it very strongly. If you just look at the scenario of the Indian migrant workers, millions of these migrant workers, just millions, walking to the highway to go home. And the homes are hundreds of miles away from where they are working. As a daily income is lost because of the pandemic. So with the loss of income, they have nothing. They can't pay the rent where they're hiding in the tiny little holes in the cities. They have to come out of that. They couldn't sell on the street because nobody is in the street anymore. They're all there. So they see that this life is totally untenable for them, for their family. So they took this children, family, all walking home because the transportation was not there. So the television was covering them. This is how people got to know about this massive exodus of people. And have no food, nothing, still trying to get home because at least that's the only survival point. And that time I was just asking myself the question, what kind of economy we have built that people have to leave their home to go hundreds of miles to find a survival livelihood, just a survival livelihood. I said, we have not even thought about it, that people must have their survival livelihood in the places where they're born, where they live. They don't live they must not leave their homes to find survival livelihood. This is not about food or anything. Simply, economists never thought that there's something else can be done, that they don't have to come all the way for survival economy for themselves. So that is the way the whole idea of informal sector is created. All these people and all the migrant workers that we are talking about, they're all considered as a part of the informal sector. And in India, it's about 70% of the population fall into the category of informal sector. I said the very name the economists thought about, the name itself is a very humiliating name, informal sector. Economists kind of wash their hands off because it's informal, we have nothing to do with our life begins, our work begins with the formal sector. So informal sector is a kind of a waiting room for people to get into through the door of the formal sector so that they go with a job. So the job is the only thing which will qualify them to find their way into the formal sector. So I said, the moment we recognize them what they are, because that's what we're living in the city, they are micro-entrepreneurs, all of them. Micro-entrepreneurs who are taking care of their own lives with their own efforts. No government has supported them. No international agencies are there to help them. Economists don't bother about them. I said, the moment you call them a micro-entrepreneur sector, at least you have established them as entrepreneurs. And they become part of the entire entrepreneurial pyramid of the country. And the top, you have the multi-billion-dollar entrepreneurs. In the middle, you have the multi-million-dollar entrepreneur. At the bottom, you have the multi-hundred-dollar entrepreneurs, but they are the same character. Simply, nobody provides them the support so that they can continue, they can expand, and so on. If we had created financial institutions for them, which we never did, that's why the microcredit and everything was struggling to do that. So things would be so different. So the income is what the loss of income, meaning hunger, right away. The food is stacked all over the place. So this is the key to the whole thing. During this corona crisis and the pandemic crisis, one of the things that we had to do in Bangladesh, in the beginning, we were very worried similar things will happen in India that happen in Bangladesh. People will go back home with no money, nothing, and hungry, and a famine type situation probably will start. So we started taking care of people who cannot feed themselves. Those who never thought about begging in their country, never thought of having this relief for themselves, but they're now coming into that. So we encourage companies after companies to have a kind of a list of people who will receive food every week so that they can survive, so that they can take care of. So thousands and thousands of families could be done. So immediately, lack of income translates into food shortage and so on. So there are many other ideas about the food and so on. I emphasize on this, the way economists thought about those people at the bottom, how the crisis has been created because of the wrong way of designing things. Rural economy has become the kind of a factory for labor producing factory. You send your people to go and work for the city. I said, that's not what it should be. Rural economy itself is an independent economy. Today, there's no problem with that. So that's how we can create survival livelihood right there. So the question of all the life and livelihood debate that came strongly during this period would be over if we can pay attention to the whole issue of how you have your own livelihood in your own place, that you build your own economy. So I'll stop there in these comments.
Oh, thank you. We'll come back to you on more of that, because clearly we need to think about institutions that need to be strengthened in order not only to cope with the immediate potential of hunger among people, but also to lay the foundations to reach the objective of abolishing hunger that we have as a humanity collected in the SDGs. President Ameenah, would you like to share with us your views as to what can we do? What are the essential conditions that we need to end hunger in the world, and what catalytic measures can we do and can be adopted now to make that work, or if there is any policy or institutional recommendations that you would like to put before this panel?
Thank you again for having me on this panel. It's a very, very important panel, especially as we emerge out of the COVID. And I think what Mr. Yunus has just said is that at the macro level, the world produces enough food to feed its burgeoning population. But producing food is not enough to eradicate hunger. And mere food production is not enough to eradicate hunger altogether, because as Mr. Yunus had just said, the production is also directly linked to employment and income security. And for us, I think in Africa, we are already seeing alarm bells ringing, because as we've seen so many jobs which have been lost during the COVID era, especially in the informal sector. Here in Mauritius, we are seeing it, and now we have a double whammy, as they say, because we have the Wakashio, the ship that has landed on our shores and causing a lot of pollution, of course, destroying the livelihoods of precisely those fisher folks whose life depend on this. But the paradox is that with all that we have said, this is the beginning of this panel, is how can one just justify food shortage? Because the planet produces enough. So we know there is the issue of distribution. There's also a issue of incompetence by some quarters, speculation. We see food waste, and I see some developed countries now taking measures to limit food waste. But this food waste doesn't stop just in the hotel industry or in the restaurant industry. It starts right at the beginning in the farmers, because they don't have enough resources or institution to help them manage this waste. And all along the food chain, things food get lost, and we see what we see. But there is something else that we also seeing, is that how do we address hidden hunger at the micro level? What is the quality of the food produced? And one, increasingly now, the scientific sector, they are actually publishing on this, the impact of climate change on the quality of foods and the level of nutrients in these foods. So these are over and above access to quantity. In the poorer world, we're going to have to cope also with the nutrient defective foods that we have. So in terms of catalytic measures, how do we enhance global food security? If I look, for example, at my continent, I'm sorry, I'm going to speak the advocate for Africa, is that we have missed the Green Revolution. And we see also in Africa, just like in Asia, in fact, Mr. Yunus has mentioned Bangladesh, women are the prime food producers on the continent. They operate in the informal sector. And what we have to do is that we need to increasingly empower these ladies with more tools, technology, finance, whether it's microfinance or other form, we need to be able to do that. And Again, I'm very happy that Mr. Yunus has mentioned entrepreneurship, because this is precisely a sector that we will need to address, especially on the African continent. You know, the African continent is home to 60% of the arable land in the world. It's the youngest population by 2050, it is predicted that we are going to be the major supplier of human capital. So we need also to develop the concept of entrepreneurship, and there's no better field than to promote that within the agriculture sector, where they can, you know, become entrepreneur, generate food, of course, look at this sector as a prime concern. And it is something that we scientists, we have to communicate on. You know, we're going to have to increasingly remove the stigma around agriculture. On African continent, we always see the pictures by multilateral organization picturing, for example, this woman in the heat, in the sun, using a hoe to dig a very dry land with a baby on her back. I mean, this is not agriculture as we know it today. So we need to really look at the stereotypes. We need to address the structures that inhibit women participation. We need to address the legal aspect, you know, all these structures and all the stereotypes that are increasingly being associated with this sector. And yet, if we go by what the African Development Bank has said, it's a $1 trillion business. Unfortunately, we'll have to flag in the notion of business here. And there is also something that we have to look at again, in the space of food production, agriculture, the neglected crop species. And we see that in Mauritius, that, you know, it is no longer fashionable, for example, to be eating moringa. It's good to be eating broccoli for whatever social status which is attached to that. But we know a lot of this neglected food can precisely address the issue of hidden hunger. And even insects now are coming up in a big way to address food security here. And we are increasingly having to cope with the vagaries of climate change. And there is something that we need to address, especially when it comes to food crops, the basic, you know, that provide us with the calories and the nutrients. We have a very limited base. And even that limited base, if you go, for example, to Central America, we see that the maize germplasm has been contaminated by GM. We need to keep on, you know, collecting seeds. We need to develop seed banks, be it nationally, regionally, and also contribute to what's going on in the Svalbard, for example, with the seed vault. But this is something that we have to address, because there is another movement to try and push for a lot of GM crops in the developing world. Fine, it can help address food security, but in the long term, you know, there may be problems as we head with the changing climate. How do we address the necessity to collect the seeds? Now, in terms of policy, I will just go by what my country did in the 1980s. We went to the IMF for getting loans to help the economy, because it was really devastated. And one of the issues we were challenged with is the issue of structural adjustment. And fortunately, at that time, the governments in place said, we are not going to adhere to all the clauses that we prescribed by the IMF, because we're going to maintain subsidy on basic food items. And thank goodness they did that, because this prevented the country from going deeper into poverty, and people could actually feed themselves, because some of the basic food items were subsidized, like rice and flour and these kind of things. So the policy vacuum that exists, that has been created by the liberalization and the increasing affordability of information communication technology in recent years, you know, they are looking at the commodities exchange, managing price stability, risk, and all this. But the trend is that we need to look at how countries can spend a larger share of their income on food. And what we're seeing is that unusual price increases is forcing them. And right now we have seen that, like Mr. Yunus has said, in India, they are forcing them to cut down on the food intake because they can't buy the food. And they take the children out of school. And in extreme cases, the only choice is to starve. So what are the policies which are being put in place to address food security as one of the basic human rights And again, you could say that, you know, food costs something, so it cannot be a human right. So again, this will be open to other debates. But we need to adopt, we need to relook at our policy response. We need to look at government being present to be able to provide for these poorest section of the communities of our countries, of our regions, you know, in our respective homes, of course, in our surrounding vicinity, how to see to it that these people can access basic, fundamental human right, which is access to food. So I'll leave it there, and of course we'll open up to further discussion.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, President. I mean, actually, you know, there are technical obstacles, but they were overcome in large part in the Green Revolution, in the sense that where you could not even produce enough for a caloric cover meaning only, you know, dividing the total number of calories by tons of food production over the total population. We're not talking about whether it is reaching the poorest or not, because as Professor Yunus has said, there's many obstacles to that as well. But for 450 million back in the 60s, there is now a caloric coverage that's going up. The key there was, and this is very important, was that by increasing the production on very small plots of the farmers with better quality plants, they were able to bring down the price. But that was very important because in the cities, the poor in the cities, this is the best anti-poverty program. It goes straight into their pocket. They spend most of their income on food, and therefore without any bureaucrats involved in trying to administer programs and so on, if you lower the price of food for them, the poorest of the poor in the cities benefit. Now, what about the poorest of the poor who are producing the food? The question would be that we need to get the level of food production going up faster than the level of price coming down. And then you have a double benefit on both sides. But that takes a lot of work, and it takes reaching out to the poor in the rural areas, which is difficult because institutions are not necessarily there. Now, if I may turn to Daniel, you had sent a nice email today, and would you like to share some of these thoughts with us before I go to Mats, and then we'll come back again. Daniel, please. Unmute. Please unmute yourself. Thank you.
There we are. Thank you. Happy to do that, and thank you for allowing me to participate in this august group. And the topic's really quite important. I agree. From my perspective, in terms of essential conditions, I think there are 4, and 2 of them are commonly noted, and 2 I think have been less of a focus in recent years. I think the obvious ones are that we still lack an adequate coherence at the macro level in global institutions that can assist governments and assist us to mobilize the resources to not only correct the temporary imbalances that may occur, but also have sufficient capacity and know-how to help rectify the structural imbalances, including trade, policy, and especially speculation. And it's also the fiscal regimes. As we said, it's not about producing more food. That's really clear. But these are the functions within governments, within countries, that threaten to become or to create structural barriers to food security. They're often that way. So I think at the macro level, we still do lack the capacity. There's a lot of theory, but I don't think there's adequate application of useful best practices yet, despite having certainly some large institutions like the FAO and IFAD and others in the space. The second issue that I think is also perhaps a bit more obvious is this issue of income inequality that Professor Yunus spoke to, and everyone I think is quite clear about, that at least having sufficient income for the poor to meet their needs for what is emerging now as, to my view, almost surprisingly popular, the concepts of a living income being well defined along with a living wage, for many countries and many rural areas, especially around the world, but not just rural. So this idea of creating a living income as a basis for what is appropriate, not working on the very popular World Bank poverty line, right? Talking about the minimum, the idea of poverty is, I think, detrimental to many of our concerns and many of our discussions in the space. I think we need to talk about the positive side of that, which is what does it take to have a living wage or living income. The other two features I think that are critical are more at a human scale. And the first one is to me an old idea, but it's certainly gone out of fashion, and I think recently has gained new visibility, and that's the capacity to diversify the production of nutritious food at a local or regional level, with some level of independence from global markets. That has, as I said, not been fashionable, but the pandemic has brought this to a much greater popularity, and even the world's wealthiest consumers and the largest companies from Walmart on down are investing substantially in local foods and localized food chains. And this creates a new visibility into local conditions. I think that's a critical piece that we often miss, is the need for some level of self-reliance. And finally, the last one, or the two perhaps less popular approaches, are new levels of information technology, from GIS to soil sensors to the interconnectivity in an information ecosystem that brings new levels of precision and understanding into the hands of even small farmers in remote areas, and connects them to networks of knowledge, of finance, of education, and other needs. The change, or the recent shifts, have brought what was before only available to the wealthiest farmers of the world. The Gates Foundation and others, at least in projects we've been involved in, have been making huge headways in the ability to deliver these technologies at super low cost, tens, at most hundreds of dollars, but often even tens of dollars, into the hands of small farmers in remote areas of South Asia and across Africa. So I think there are enormous new opportunities to empower local communities and empower farmers to do the best with the resources they have.
Well,
thank you.
Thank you, because I think it's very important that we all, I believe we all agree to move towards more precision farming. Precision farming will use IT, especially satellite data capacity, to analyze soils, water, nutrient management, even on small plots. We have seen, in fact, Muhammad Yunus was the pioneer who brought the mobile phones to remote areas, and people say, what are you talking about? These are some of the poorest people in the world. You're going to give them mobile phones? And he said, yes. And they did the Grameen phone.
And to women.
Yeah, women. And they did the same thing in Kenya, in M-Pesa, and so on. So they know how to use handheld devices, and we can mediate getting analytical data on their soils and their conditions of their plots and so on, even if the plots are very small, because in Africa and Asia, we have average farm size of between 1 to 1.5 hectares, whereas, for example, in Europe and the United States, the average farm is over 70 hectares. So it's kind of huge. And Latin America, of course, also has some substantial thing, although there is a separate problem, which is the landless farm labor. That's a separate problem. So yes, we can marry the best of the new biology with the recognition of natural biodiversity, with the IT, and assist the farmers to do better, especially, and this is something that I would hope we will come to, and I'll pose this question to Matt, is that if we look at the conditions of climate change, which has not gone away despite the brief reduction in emissions during the COVID pandemic, but the cost of that in terms of putting people out of work and so on has been enormous. We have erratic rainfall is predicted in every model, and erratic rainfall is terrible for sub-Saharan Africa, which 95% depends on rain-fed agriculture, not on irrigation. And at the same time, the climate change patterns in front of us, there is no real, at present anyway, despite the best efforts of the Europeans, which are much better than the Americans, in the resurgence and the stimulus packages, we are not getting a green recovery. We are not moving towards a circular economy, and despite the words that are there, you are, in fact, in another debate, I said, we are putting these multi-trillion-dollar packages in protecting the business as usual scenario. It is the companies that exist that you're trying to shore up so that they don't go bankrupt. It is the jobs that existed that you want people to go back to. And you are putting these trillions of dollars into that, instead of governments, say, adopting a national program of where they would spend the money on the green transformation and then get the private sector to implement it. So as a result of that, we will be hopefully coming out of the COVID and the post-COVID economics, and then we have to face up again to where we were with both the adaptation for resilience in the developing countries and the emissions for the rich. And it's sad that the people who pay the biggest price in terms of climate change are those who contributed least to creation of the problem. But that's the way it is. Mats, your thoughts. Unmute yourself, please. No, you're still muted. Yeah, that's better.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you for bringing us together, Ismail, Mohammed, Ameenah, all of you. Shame on us. I mean, we should not be here where we are in 2020. This was a solvable problem, foreseen, analyzed. We know what to do with finance, with technology, with all of it. But yet here we are, and it raises fundamental questions about how we are managing anything, frankly. And food security is up there together with early childhood development as the primary binding constraints to anything that will lead to better humanity than we have been able to provide for our children and the way we live. So we really need to get at it. I'm not happy that we are raising it, but I'm glad that some of you are raising this particular side. Can we please do the same on early childhood development? That would be a plea to the circle of friends among which we are. Food supplies today are, of course, hampered by COVID. They are hampered also by other trade issues that have nothing to do with food security, but where we are seeing the global trade system deteriorating. And obviously with all the retarded action on climate change that you just mentioned, Ismail. So we're having a bad issue in a bad context and with bad political drivers. So different from where we were before. And if I were try to say something, let me, since it's so existential, the challenge, let me reach back to Immanuel Kant with 4 questions. What do we know? What should we do? What can we hope for? And who are we, the humankind? I'll be very brief. But regarding as to what we know so much, but with what Daniel said, I had written down visibility in my notes, exactly the same thing. We must bring this issue to visibility. Otherwise, I don't think we can break through the barriers that prevent the complexity of even doing what we know works in terms of food security. And if there is a positive collateral to the COVID crisis, it should be the respect for science. So facts, institutions that bring out facts, and we should be prime arguers for this, because the other side is undermining this without shame. I'll be brief. So that's just what do we know? We know a lot. We know what works as well, any amount of experience. But then what should we do? Obviously, the planet can feed us. The lower production, the lower predictions of population levels are actually giving us a boon. If you believe in this, and it would be interesting. But if the population levels are lower, it will be easier. Of course, everything is about productive employment, but it will reduce the pressure on productive employment, given that we handle economic policies correctly. We should never relent on innovation. That belongs to what do we know, but that's also what should we do. And the people who you have gathered, Ismail, are all involved in this. And I'd like to celebrate, and I've tried to move in that direction without making a huge personal commitment, into vegetarianism. It is the right way to go, and it should be said at this level of policy discussion, because it is important. It leads to big macro numbers. If this, I read about it almost for the first time, the World Food System Summit, if that kind of thing is happening, that's what it should be bringing out, to tell people this story of what we can do. This is sort of at the mega level of what we should do. But at macro and micro, we know, Ismail, you mentioned debt. It's unconscionable to have this division of capital accumulation for the rich and depleting the savings for the poor. This should be brought out in absolutely stark terms. On the micro side, there are many, many issues to be talked about. I think we're learning more and more about universal basic income, decent income, other welfare systems. You can't solve food security without solving that. So food security, in my view, is a consequence of doing good welfare politics, and that is different in different countries. That's short on what we should do. Now, what can we hope for? Kant's third question. I'm not humbled as we have been, if I may say we, over years of hope. There is no point in spelling out a utopian vision, but we have changed things over time, and there's no reason, despite the dismal environment we are facing today, that we couldn't already prepare not only for however much we can achieve the SDGs, but going for the next generation beyond the SDGs. It might seem too early to talk about what happens after the SDGs, but you will remember, Ismail, what MDGs were not welcome. We achieved them. Maybe we achieved something from the SDGs, but what comes next? 2015, 2025 is soon. So 2030 is soon. So we better prepare, but that's what we guys should be doing. And the binding constraints here, the awful geopolitics of the world, the consequences, which has to do with narcissistic political leaders who do not care. I could rant on this, but I will stop. The geoeconomics is primarily a question of oligarchs and corruption and monopolistic stuff. It is just like Mohammed Yunus says, if we provide the finance from bottom up, everyone can profit from that. Then there is the geotechnology, which we should add to that set, because we have to share technology in a new way. So that's what I think we can hope for, and we have to fight for it. And I'll end on the fourth question that often the people who quote Kant do not include, which is, who are we as human beings? Why are we so vulnerable to corruption and behaving in a way against our better angels, against our better knowledge? I think that this issue can only be addressed by leaders and bottom up, both sides, but I emphasize leaders too, as we are among a leaders circle: truth, deliberation, and respect. And I think we can make an impact.
Can I just add something, Ismail?
Yes, please go ahead. I'd like to welcome also Romania, but please go right ahead, President Ameenah.
Yes,
go ahead.
There's something that we need to get back our institutions up again. And we've seen one precisely in the line of the geopolitics we're talking about. We have seen how the WTO, for example, is completely, paralyzed. And we know that the regulation the WTO can come up with is precisely to allow developing countries to adopt non-market-based policies. And sometimes these policies can help in building, maintaining strategic food reserves, and sometimes allowing to give subsidies for market development. So I think this should be a rallying call to get our institutions back up and running so that we can have, we're talking about a level playing field. It will never be a level playing field, but at least we'll get something out of it precisely to curb these excesses which is happening elsewhere and impacting, of course, the poorer people. Thank you.
Thank you for that reminder, because regretfully, the United States is not only destroying the WTO, it's pulling out of the WHO, it's attacking multilateralism at every possible chance it gets. It moves towards bilateral trade deals, getting out of even regional trade deals like the TTP and so on. I would just like to say something, because my friend Mohammed Yunus, when he and I worked together many years ago, initially did not start with a primary focus on women. He started with a primary focus on poor people, and then very quickly found himself almost 90+% of his clients were women, because that's what worked. It was mentioned right now, but I want to bring up something else about women, which is unfortunately not sufficiently appreciated. If you talk about child nutrition, many people will tell you school feeding programs. And that's good. I mean, I'm not denying the importance of school feeding programs. But actually, the single most important vector for feeding, for nutrition for children, is nutrition for pregnant women. Yeah. Because a well-nourished mother will deliver an average weight baby. If they deliver a baby that is way below average weight, that baby has a very large chance of stuntage and wastage in the first 6 months of life. So the last trimester of the mother and the first 6 months of life are absolutely critical also for the development of the brain. And the below weight children are also more susceptible to diseases and to infant mortality. So again, women are at the center. Dr. Yunus was very wise in moving quickly on that in Grameen many years ago. Prime Minister Petre Roman, welcome. We're delighted to have you join us, and would love to have your thoughts about how to deal with food security.
First of all, let me apologize for being late. One of the reasons is that simply I didn't have the idea of the meeting, but also I was a little bit late for some different reason. But I would like to restart from the basic level. The basic level, of course, on food security, which is, there are very simple questions. Food security, is it a global objective? Yes. Is it a fundamental strategic objective? Yes. Well, once we have stated that, the cure, the solution, the way on achieving food security is first, or both, cooperation and leadership. Cooperation, coordination, and leadership. There are many uncertainties related to food security, many aspects of nutrition, many aspects of food security from the point of view of geographical regions. Of course, there are parts of the world which are under a big strain of food security, other parts where this problem is not so urgent. But I would say that cooperation, it's not the solution, it's the only solution. It's the only solution. If we accept that we are so strongly intertwined, I mean, let's take the problem of related to food security of migration. How can we cope with, let's say, a huge wave of migration? It's almost impossible to imagine. What we can do is to prevent that such a wave of migration due, among other things, to food security. It's, as I said, to prevent. And food security is related to a subject which I devoted almost all my professional life, which is climate change. Food security from this point of view is under a bigger menace than before. We know that climate change could impact a lot on the availability of crops, availability of beneficial agriculture. So cooperation, again, is not the solution, is the only solution. And you have just underlined, you have just stressed on the reality of our world today, which is less, unfortunately, less multilateralism as it was only, let's say, few years ago. Only a few years ago, we were quite confident that the world is moving into more multilateralism, into accepting more the multilateralist approach. It's not the case. You have seen how a political decision, how a political leader can change that very quickly and wrongly. Well, if a leader is capable of defining very, very clearly the fundamental, the strategic, the existential objective, and this is, and I repeat it, food security is an existential objective. It's the reason to be sometimes. Well, then the level of confidence he can rise, he can move into the world is stronger than the uncertainty level. I don't know if I'm completely clear about that, because we are obviously living in a very uncertain world. The level of uncertainty is big. The level of expectations is very low. So real good leaders are capable of instilling confidence, and that confidence is capable of beating the uncertainty that is sometimes obviously prevailing. The civil society, what we can do in order to bend this tendency of less multilateralism? Well, I think that civil society everywhere has or can have a very strong impact. Can have a very strong impact. I think as the Najami Foundation is trying to do, other associations, other global foundations are also trying to do, is to offer, to explain to the people everywhere that their voice should be taken into account by the leaders. And ultimately, the leaders, even the very authoritarian leaders, the dictators, like recently Lukashenko, in the end, they are simply forced to take into account the civil voice. So I don't see right now that the global format, like let's say G20 or G7, or being able to right now to put on the right trail the problem of multilateralism cooperation. But I see that the civil society can do a lot into this direction.
Well, thank you very much, Petros, for this observation. However, let me be the devil's advocate here.
Absolutely.
The civil society is also an enormous source of misinformation about on the internet and so on. They spread all sorts of wrong things. I spend a lot of time with doctors on the COVID and the treatments and the vaccines and where they stand.
Where is the cause? I mean, I think let's not put the cause as the effect. I mean, do not reverse the causality relationship. We should not see the cause where we have the effect. That's why I said that the task is our task, is to explain, and we have no other, as in every field, people are rather interested, at least, to listen to experts, to listen to scientists. You see, let's have a good example. Let's compare the audience, the positive audience about climate change today with respect with just, let's say, 10 years ago. We have a much greater awareness. Is it true?
Yes, of course.
So this example is a very good example that yes, in time, if the let's say the explanation is authentic, I mean based on something real, on something authentic, on something so which is almost or even compulsory, then the good information, the proper information, the authentic information can be propagated.
Well, I love your optimism. That's good. I saw Garry raising his hand earlier on. Garry, you wanted to intervene on something. Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Ismail, and thank you all for wonderful presentations and touching so many insightful points. I was going to reserve my comments till the end, but there are some themes that came up that I'd like to hear more discussion on and hear from your views on. So I just wanted to interject them. The link between the link between jobs or incomes and food security has been made very well by Mohammed Yunus and Daniele and others. I'm American, but based in South India. And we did a study 30 years ago that showed we could create 100 million jobs in India by raising food production, by raising agricultural production. Mm-hmm. Not that all those jobs would be on the farm. At that time, there was about 54% of the population in agriculture. Now it was mentioned about 47. But because of the downstream effects on processing, on distribution, and other things. And I think agriculture is not only a source of the food, but the irony is everybody thinks of getting rid of the jobs in agriculture, but there's so much more that can be done to make, that's where the industrial revolution began in India, only because of where the surpluses in agriculture came in, Punjab in the north and Coimbatore in the south. So it's also part of the solution, not only for food, but for the jobs and incomes. And in fact, our program showed that it would generate the jobs to create the demand for the food. It create the demand that would enable the nutritional needs to be met. So there is a circular relationship. The other point I wanted to mention, I think it was Daniele and Ameenah also mentioned the issue of distribution. I did a lot of research on the Green Revolution in India. And I think Professor Yunus knows about the Bengal famine in the 40s, which was very largely a problem of distribution. It was not just a problem, it was a problem of where the food was not getting to everybody who needed it. And that was certainly true when India had its Green Revolution. It was heralded as a great technological breakthrough. But actually, 2/3 of the strategy, and I worked closely with the people who were the fathers, the architects of the Green Revolution, 2/3 of the strategy was not technology, it was organization. It was the setting up of the food corporation that took the surpluses from Punjab and other places where the farmers were hesitant to produce more because it would just rot on the road because they couldn't distribute it, and distribute it to the deficit areas like Bihar and other places, and created a global, a national market for it. I mention it because I think already there's been a reference to the need for multilateral cooperation on this. Remus was talking about it. And there's been a lot of resistance because of the neoliberal policies and because of the effort to keep agriculture and food in the market, the free market. I was asked to do a study in 1990 by a foundation which was financing Green Revolution strategies by Norman Borlaug in Africa. And we took one look at it and said, he's doing everything on the hybrid varieties, but where's the distribution system? Where's the market? Where's the floor price and all? It's not just a technology problem. Well, what about now? Now that the serious system has become, the problem has become so serious, what can we revive back the idea of, if not global, because there's a lot of resistance from the food exporting developed countries, but what about a food distribution system, a cooperative system at the regional level among those to balance out the food supply, to ensure that surpluses can be marketed, to prevent the peak speculation and prices and all? Is there an organizational solution at the international level, even if it's not global, that can come and challenge the neoliberal philosophy that we have to take this thing that we all agree is so critically important and not leave it to the whims of the market when hundreds of millions of lives are at stake on a daily basis. So I just wanted to interject these thoughts.
I'm glad you did, because the global part is absolutely essential. My own country, Egypt, is the world's #1 importer of wheat. Algeria is the second world importer of wheat. So in fact, all of the North Africa, which are a key part of the so-called arid zone for agriculture, do not have self-sufficiency in fundamental food crops. And they rely on international trade in order to meet the production needs, the food needs of their populations. And Egypt is 100 million people. We only have the Nile, as you know. There's hardly any rain that comes anywhere. And as a result, you know, there is so we do need the global picture very much.
May I add something to what just have been said? To add something to
Yes.
what Professor said.
Please go ahead, Petre.
Yes, well, I think that the market forces and the market stimulus, if they are not crucial, they are very important, because it's not just about the employment in agriculture itself. It's much more than that. It's all related to that: transportation, storage, and distribution. There are a lot more of jobs related to this than in agriculture itself. And let's also remember that if today within the European Union, agriculture is a flourishing sector, it's also obviously because there is the subsidy policy, the agricultural policy of the European Union. The farmers have much more guarantees of their revenues, of their income, because they have this always, they know that there is this, there are these subsidies coming for them in order to raise crops. So there is a balance. There is a balance to be struck between, on one hand, the forces of the market, the stimuli of the market, and the guarantees. And the guarantees comes from a global understanding, not otherwise.
Thank you. Thank you. That's important. I would like to turn now to, I'm going to call our unexpected surprise guest, Mila Ovovic. I can't possibly have you around and not seek a few words of wisdom from you, especially on this topic, which is important to all of us, I think, and as has been said, is an existential thing for all of humanity. And we are going to get into a big confrontation, probably starting late next year, as we move away from COVID towards, hopefully, move away from COVID towards coming back to the fundamental issues of climate change. There was a cartoon which was very nice. It showed the planet fighting, you know, the planet to the head of the globe, fighting with, boxing with a virus, with the head of the virus with the spikes, and they're boxing away in the ring. And then standing outside is this huge guy called climate change, waiting to see the outcome of the fight before they into the ring. And it's very Somebody was telling me, look, air pollution has disappeared. It's looking great in New Delhi. I said, yeah, maybe for a few days, but the big issues of climate change are still there, and we're going to have to go back to them soon enough. So, Mira, what would you like to say?
Thank you so much. I'm profoundly honored, especially to hear the word wisdom from you. Tremendous pressure right now. But as I'm listening to this really extraordinary conversation that I'm hoping will be spurring movements, I am thinking of the ways in which we need to organize to make this happen. And connecting all of the wisdom that I've already heard, it seems to me, especially from the work of Professor Yunus, that you find this social innovations at on the edges of society, at the marginalized places. That's where the social force and the necessity of social force is concentrated the most, because the pressures are the greatest. I'm zooming out a little bit on the social processes because I think that's where the solutions are. And by all means, I always mention the power of learning from the village ways, making way out of no way. That's the profound wisdom that is in the social processes of the greatest base of humanity that we have. And what Professor Yunus has discovered, or you, Ismail, or Garry has discovered in our work, and everything that I've heard from Your Excellency Ameenah and Matt and Petrus, Your Excellency as well, is that that's where the social innovation needs to be called upon, brought forth in order to connect the greater dots, because it's not going to happen within the existing institutions. They're too rigid. They are set on certain ways. There's tremendous vested interests, but there's also mandates. And we have seen it even in the United Nations. We are proud to collaborate with the United Nations, Geneva. And they called on the World Academy exactly for that reason. You have well-intentioned people that were moved by ideals that got them into the UN, but they ended up locked into mandate. So they have a conflict of mandate versus mission. And they say, who are these organizations that are going to be big enough platforms, neutral enough and inspired enough, with inspired sense of responsibility, to be able to bring new energy, new vitality, and new convening power. And luckily enough, it happens to be the tremendous legacy that we have gotten from Bertrand Russell and Einstein and other masterminds that founded the Academy. As I listened to this, I thought, what will it take if we are finding the social power and social leadership and new social learning process in these segments of society and these demographics that are under distress? The tremendous leadership we have seen in the youth. How can we connect the youth to the wisdom of scientists who are not being listened to or are being instrumentalized? We've seen it in the academy, in the history of the academy. The scientific knowledge is appropriated. Scientists as intellectuals and as human beings end up being instrumentalized for all kinds of purposes, and the fruit of their labor misused, right? So what are the ways in which we can connect? And that's the question for the project that we're on, global leadership, that for me primarily, because I keep thinking, if the process has to emerge in an informal way, how can we give it conscious organization? Because I can tell you, as I'm sure all of you know, to organize peaceful demonstration takes tremendous intelligence, takes tremendous amount of conscious organization. So when people say, people are showing up in the streets protesting against something, to have peaceful demonstration takes an enormous amount of organization. And the children showing up in front of the UN did not show up to protest. They showed up to call forth on our responsibility with open arms, saying, where are you? And what can we count on from you? So what are the ways in which we could connect youth movements on these crucial issues with the political leadership of people like we have here on the panel, and scientific leadership? That's what preoccupies me. So I guess I'm returning a question, taking into account all of the aspects of production, transformation, transportation, storage, distribution, all of the designing of the new social architecture that has to go with the circulation of global energy to feed people, to light up the planet and illuminate the human mind, I guess.
Mm.
Thank you. Thank you. Now I will certainly, this is a wide open discussion anyway, but I see Mats, you wanted to come in. Those who want to come in, just give me a signal like that, and I'm making a list of bringing people in for discussion. Okay, Mats, you go first, then Ameenah second, then Muhammad Yunus third. Go ahead.
Just a brief one. We don't know what will happen post-COVID, whether we'll have the same world or a worse world or a better world. This is all for leadership to create. But as I listen to Mila, I'm very encouraged from her focus on youth. What we do know for sure on economics is that those who own assets profit in this time because they can protect themselves, they save, and they have their assets. Those who are vulnerable lose their assets and their flexibility. So what was already the case before COVID, that we were diverging, will lead to more divergence post-COVID. Now, we have a long list of things that we need to do to counter this. But one thing is to give assurance to youth in some way that they have a hope in this, because they were already being, excuse my language, screwed by the past years, not being able to save, not being able to buy into assets, not mobile the way they thought they would be. So we have a real responsibility to do follow up on something that Mila said.
Yeah, that's important indeed. Thank you. Ameenah, you are the floor.
Thank you. Thank you again. Very interesting discussion on how to mobilize the youth. But there is another plea I'd like to make as well, is how to go back to traditional knowledge. This is something which has been missing in our discussion, in our dialogue, not just here, but of course elsewhere as well. How do we create that third way between traditional knowledge, which has been valid, which is still valid today, be it for agriculture, be it for adaptation to climate change. And this is a knowledge which is being marginalized, and yet this knowledge can help us create a third way with the sciences. And I think if we look at the narrative coming out of Australia, the Aborigines, they had the solution for the fires, and they have been marginalized, and nobody had listened to them. And now when they go back to what these people had to say, they realize that so much truth in this. And this is something that we have to flag into narrative as well, is how much emphasis and how much respect, because we're increasingly calling on the word respect here. How much do we respect this knowledge? How much are we going to mainstream that into our decision-making processes? Because if these people have been able to survive for so long based on these traditional cultures, traditional knowledges, we should be paying, we should lend them our ears and listen to what they have to say, because whatever they have said so far has been valid. I think Ismail will know, if you look at the documentation that has emerged out of Egypt, unfortunately it's called Eber's Papyrus, and this information is still valid today in terms of for the medical world. So we need to cast a special line. I think there's a special unit in the UN that takes care of that.
Mm-hmm.
UNESCO also has special programs on that as well. Indeed. Professor Yunus, you want to come in, please?
Yes, I was just trying to bring attention to some of our experience from Bangladesh. We had a terrible famine in 1974, but some 46 years back. Lots of people died of hunger. And our population at that time was 75 million, and we were a very densely populated country. Today, we had a huge shortage in food production in Bangladesh in 1974 when the famine came. So we are a food importing country for a long time. Today, we have 175 million, addition of 100 million more now, added to 1974 population. we are a food surplus country for many years now. So coming from a food short country with 75 million people and being a surplus country, food surplus country with the addition of 100 million people, we used to grow only one crop, rain-fed crop. Sometimes flood took it away. Now we have at least 2.5 crops a year. Irrigation is a big support for the whole thing. It's a high-yielding variety which makes the difference, everything. In people, quality of life for the people much improved because of the food productions and so on that took place. But at the same time, we are most densely populated country in the whole world, and it keeps growing. Our land is squeezed because people build houses and land for schools, land for highways, and everything else. The worst part of it, global warming. Global warming is taking away our land because as the sea level rises, we become more squeezed. We are a very flat country, very close to the sea level. So a little rise in the sea level, chunk of our land goes. So it's about that 1/4 of the country is under 1 meter above the sea level. So the sea level keep growing and we keep on losing. So our land is getting squeezed from both ends. One in a physical way for the global warming, another for living conditions and so on, bigger houses, land, schools and so on. But it's still we are a food surplus country. As we are a surplus country and improving food diet, people are moving from cereals to other crops. Now we are a vegetable growing country also because people love vegetables now. Because before they never had so much vegetable fruits and meat. So that brings us to the meat culture again. So food habits are changing a little bit. Meat is again a risk for global warming. And that brings me to another example, the Amazon forest, Amazonian forest fire. And that also happened because of the meat production, because people wanted to grow feed with soybean and all that. So they burned the forest to make that happen. So here we are, when we say agriculture, where we are clashing. The global warming comes to our door now from the food window, which as long as we have the beef and all other meat, it continues as long as we keep on destroying the forest to grow, to feed the food industry like meat industry. That's another big risk. How we get integrated. At the same time, we are a cyclone-prone country, Bangladesh, and a flood-prone country. Cyclones are becoming more frequent, more serious. So because of the global warming. So it's all integrated. This is what it's just looking from the window of one country, how you see global warming hitting us in a good story, turning to a bad story. So this is one idea, one item I don't want to leave behind from the table. So we want to keep sure that we integrate the whole thing, that it's not something go away. And we are deteriorating the soil conditions, again, environmental things. It's by our, chemical fertilizer, insecticides and so on, very intensive use of the chemical fertilizer. So how the technology now can help us to overcome this, and how the global warming can help us in survive this little piece of land that we got. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a quick answer to your question. We have finally, way back when we were together and I was with the CGIR, I was chairman of the CGIR.
Yeah, you were the chairman of the CGIR for many years.
Yeah, for 7 years. I used to always argue that while we had done a lot of biological work and good work on the plants, we were terrible on the fertilizers because we were treating it purely chemically. The question was whether you brought nitrates or you brought phosphates or so on. Whereas the real soil fertility was the biomes that are intermingled with the soil. And now I'm happy to say we are learning a lot more about that. And more recently even, we found that the carbon sequestration in the soil is even bigger than it is in the plants. Ratan Lal, who won this year's World Food Prize, Dr. Yunus was one of our early laureates on that. Ratan Lal has really done a lot of work showing how soils, not just plants, is extremely important in terms of dealing with the climate change issue. And Mats had mentioned earlier the 1943 Bengal famine. There is now a lot of people writing, and Shashi Tharoor is one of them, that Churchill was making the decisions because of the war, and he kept the food away from the people, and that in today's terminology, we would consider him a war criminal for having had 1 million people die of hunger when he had the food, and that he wanted to keep them as a buffer for the British Army. But that's a minor aside. Given the time, I propose that we go through a final round, and I'll start with Prime Minister Petre. You had your hand up, and then I'll go to President Ameenah, and then we'll go through everybody, and we'll end up with my friend Garry. Go ahead, Petre.
Thank you. Petrus is the name of my son.
I'm sorry. I get Petrus Roman.
That's true. He put that name in. You see, my name, of course, it's Petre Roman, as you know.
Petre, yeah. Okay.
You know. Now, I was listening very intensely to Professor Muhammad on the issue of agriculture in Bangladesh. Huge, tremendous technological progress has been made in the last, let's say, several decades. But I want to mention just one, which could be of crucial importance if the tendency of the ocean rising is to reach at some point, nobody knows when, a critical point. And that precise technological progress I want to mention is what Netherlands, the Low Countries, Netherlands, was capable to do in order to extend their land. The technology today in Netherlands is absolutely formidable and perfect. They have been able to recuperate from the sea thousands and thousands of, hundreds of square kilometers, many thousands of hectares with their excellent technology. And I think if at some point we are, let's hope, we became aware of the impact of the flooding on migration, and then the migration on everybody, because we in Europe, we have had a small example with the people coming from Syria. It is nothing compared with what could be a migration wave from flood or from food scarcity. Then I think the level of the UN, for example, this subject of the way to combat flooding and to extend land, agricultural land notably, should be of great importance. Thank you.
Thank you. President Ameenah.
Thank you. Just 3 quick points on what we have been discussing so far. We have mentioned in the course of our conversation the impact of the geopolitics impacting food security and of course food distribution and all that. And we have mentioned the fires in the Amazon. And I think increasingly the evidence is pointing to precisely the political wars between China and Americas. And this had to do, of course, with the importation of soya. And this is where the soya plantation will next be, right in the midst of the Amazon forest. So these are things that we have to be quite mindful of, is of course the geopolitics which are impacting not just food production or distribution, but of course where the main crops are going to happen by virtue of, you know, all that goes with these political wars. And the second thing is that we've heard about the refugees. We know that part of the, you know, the account of the migration of people in Syria has been linked also to climate change. But I think one we have to be very mindful of is the climate refugees that we're going to see soon happening if we are not careful with what we do with, for example, the African continent where the migration is happening. And this is where we make a rallying call how to keep the people on the African continent by empowering them with the appropriate technology, the appropriate tools, so that agriculture can become a source of jobs and, of course, entrepreneurship for these young people who otherwise will be migrating out of the continent. So agriculture remains one of the pillars on which we can build to improve livelihoods, and of course to create jobs as well through this entrepreneur. The third one is to ensure distribution within one country of agricultural produce. We increasingly will have to invest in the technology, and one of the technologies that has been put forward, which has made a difference, at least on a pilot study, has been the distribution of vegetable in Cameroon using blockchain technology and using mobile telephony. So these are things that we can leverage fairly quickly, especially in light of the penetration of telephony across the poorer parts of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mila, we've adopted you into this panel, so you can't escape. Any last words? Mila.
I'll be very brief. I think what is possible and what needs to happen as soon as possible is to have meta policy level making. That is new global standards on the basis of which all companies, regions, nations are accountable, meets the base of humanity and demographics such as youth, such as women, such as all the disenfranchised, like the ones of which Ameenah, Her Excellency Ameenah was speaking. There's disenfranchised forms of knowledge. We cannot afford not to have them. In fact, she has just spoken about how vital they are and how blind of us it would be to have disenfranchised pockets of humanity or regions of the world or strands of knowledge. So integration of knowledge, integration of humanity that has to be met and sustained from the bottom up by movements and from top down sustained by a global framework of human security.
Thank you. Mats.
2 points. I think I want to first pick up on that Churchill reference, because all leaders will be judged eventually. And this is the leadership moment. There will be much more pressure from below, organized pressure, transparent pressure. But all leadership somehow in our conversations will have to get to a political point where we make decisions. And in this world, we have seen failure of leadership. I will say Trump, just to mention the term or the word, but there are many other leaders who are problematic in the world today. And I think leaders at the levels we have access to must step up and speak much more clearly. It is a leadership moment where we will lose or win. That's 1 point, and we cannot fail in that courage, whether it is food security or another issue. 2, just a one-liner. We mentioned youth quite a bit, but I think the feminist side of things got a little bit short shrift in our discussion, knowing how important women are in food security chain and in many other ways. But there's open territory now in a way that wasn't there before. So those 2 points.
Thank you, Matt. Muhammad Yunus, my good friend.
Well, I mentioned, yes, about
any additional words before we wrap up?
No, thank you, done.
Daniele.
Thank you. I think we all agree that we need to unleash a new level of boldness. I think that's clear, starting with an unprecedented levels of collaboration. I think we've all noted that. So we need a new level, essentially. And I have 4 brief points about this that I think we've not fully touched on, but worth noting. One is that, to begin, we must adequately address the political will. The right to food must be legally ensconced, even enshrined, I would say, as a basic human right into the Constitution of Nations, as equal to any other aspect of human justice. And this must trump the speculative forays that are occurring frequently in key food crops and that disrupt markets. I think that prioritization is critical. We also can't forget the vital role of the private sector. We haven't mentioned them much, but they create or make any of these solutions problematic. And we need to mobilize them to not only support, but also provide the resources and most of all the innovation necessary to radically transform what we're doing. If they're not included, if they're excluded, this will be a far more challenging road. The third point is that I think we must also take a moral stand, as Professor Yunus and many of my esteemed colleagues have said. It's about income. And so providing those opportunities across gender lines, certainly for youth, but we need to take a moral stand for adequate or universal basic or even living incomes. And I think we have to not just do that in a vacuum. We have to tie this into international media and markets to help ensure that wealthier consumers can be conscious of the conditions of hunger and thus can potentially participate in conveying an appropriate value for food crops. I'm reminded in one commodity that I work a lot in, the world's largest cash crop, which is coffee, that there are many people in northern countries who buy a latte or cafe au lait for the approximate value of close to $3 on average in many European and North American places. And when people understand that a farmer gets 3 cents of that approximately, if they're lucky, they begin to, what's wrong with this equation? Right? Something is clearly wrong when people begin to understand. And I think we're just getting to that opportunity. The media can be a friend to any of these processes. And I think finally, ultimately, I'm a pragmatist in all of these things. And so while some of these catalytic solutions may be global, I believe that many need to come out of the macro and will be and must be essentially localizable. I think several people have touched on that because we have to start with realistic steps. So we cannot only focus on macro solutions when empowering individuals is paramount. Since the problem of food security is mostly man-made, we agree on that. We must undertake to craft solutions that take into account human-centered design. And I think that human-centered design and a renaissance of the local as newly empowered and as architects of one's own solutions have to be part of anything that we put forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Garry, unmute yourself, please. Thank you.
This has been a remarkably rich and holistic discussion, exceeded my high aspirations for the group, and I would like to thank everyone on behalf of the World Academy and my colleagues, our partners at NGIC, who we'll hear from Rovshan also, I'm sure. But what I appreciated most is because we've really looked at it as a global problem, but we've also looked at it as a very human problem. And we've also looked at it as a problem that it essentially covers all aspects of our global social existence. We've looked at the health part of it, the migration part of it, the link with incomes, the link with nutrition, the link with markets, the link with technology. The need, it came out so many times. This is a task that can only be done when we look at everything, the climate issue as well. It cannot be, the local, as Daniele said, it has to have a strong local dimension. That's where the change has to take place. But without the global coordination, the strong, I think it was Peter who said, the strong cooperation, the strengthening of multilateralism, which is a core issue for our UN WAAS project on global leadership. What are the strategies that we can use to strengthen multilateralism at the global level? And I think this discussion brings out clearly the multilateralism and the leadership, the theme that has been coming out so strongly, is not just the leaders of national governments. It's leadership in business, it's leadership in NGOs, it's leadership in science, it's leadership in national academies, it's leadership in youth. Our multilateral environment has changed radically over the last 30 years. We've multiplied the number of NGOs 300-fold just in 30 years. We have so many agencies that are active in the international field, in the global society. And the challenge we have today is to redefine our concept of multilateralism and our institutions for it. What we have represented here is a wide spectrum of not only expertise, but of different stakeholders in the process. And on behalf of the World Academy, you have helped us very much in clarifying thought, in defining not only the problems, but also the direction we need to move. We invite you to collaborate with us as we're moving forward to come up. How do we pinpoint those catalytic solutions that don't have to be the utopian answers and cannot be at this time, but can generate the momentum, generate the hope that we have to give to the new generation, to release initiative. Ultimately, we have to mobilize the global society, the population, to demand a change in the system, to demand a change in the rules. I love what Mats came to at the end, or Daniele, perhaps it was, about we have to put the right to food as a basic human right. We have to put it right on the top of the agenda. And without that, without the right to income or the right to job, we're not going to do this. This all is utopian, certainly. But I think, I don't know about you, but I think if we look back 5 years ago to the ideas that are being entertained today, all of them look completely unrealistic just a few years ago, because the situation is so serious. We're thinking differently. In our conference that we had with the UN in June, which Ismail was played a key role in, and Rovshan and Mila and many others, about 200. What was most remarkable of all and least expected of all was how convinced the participants were, high-level participants were. This is not only a critically difficult, challenging time, but it's also a time where we can make dramatic changes that just seemed utopian a few years ago. So I'm glad we have not shied away from looking at those solutions, because that's got to be the future. The problems are too serious. The solutions are there, but we've got to break the thinking and go beyond the present paradigm. Thank you all so much for a wonderful experience.
Thank you, Garry. I will, first of all, I want to thank a lot of people, but I'm going to make it brief, but I also want to thank specifically friends like Muhammad Yunus and and actually Gordon Brown and others who have joined us in an unbelievably more participatory fashion with NGIC, and we're very proud to have welcomed them all. We are, all of us, whether it's WAAS or the Yunus Foundation or Kailash Satri or Kerry Kennedy or any of these people with their foundations, their platforms, we're all working together in a major alliance. And to me, this major alliance on one part is indeed to protect the multilateral system of rules and regulations that does not allow a system whereby only the strong dictate to the weak, where the rich take from the poor, but in fact where norms and values that were already embodied not just in the United Nations but in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights should guide our action. Now, for me, I have used life a very powerful example that still motivates me very strongly when we talk about food security. And that is that once upon a time in the 19th century, there were people who looked at the condition of slavery and said that it was unconscionable and unacceptable. And they didn't talk about marginally improving the condition of slaves. They didn't talk about can we get some additional benefits here or there. They said it has to be abolished. And they were known as the abolitionists. And it was against an enormous array of economic interests. The slave trade was one of the most profitable trades that existed, and the triangular trade that went from Africa to the Americas and brought back food from the Americas to Europe and then went back again with weapons and so on, was an enormously powerful one. And there were people like William Wilberforce and others, the abolitionists they were known, who kept proposing the law to make it illegal in the British Empire, then the largest empire. And for 33 years, every year they would present a bill in the British Parliament to abolish slavery, all kinds of slavery, everywhere in the British Empire. And the British government would not deal with it. And they were considered by many to be utopians and thinking in a terrible, terrible, unrealistic way, but they won. And I believe that on the question of hunger, amidst a world that can provide for everybody, is equally unconscionable. I mean, that is the most fundamental thing a human being can have, is food to eat, not die of hunger. And that we have people who are still chronically malnourished. Well, we're going to use the technical terms of hunger. Let's face it. In the second SDG, we say abolish hunger. We want to abolish poverty and abolish hunger. So we have to become the new abolitionists, the abolitionists of the 21st century, who are motivated not so much by economic interest or trying to fiddle at the margin with a few tools here or there, but who will speak out with a sense of outrage, as I did and Mats did when I said, you know, here are the rich guys spending trillions of, actually almost $11 trillion on stimulus packages, and then telling the poorest countries in Africa, and for you, well, we can delay collecting $11 billion in debt. We will delay collecting it, so we'll still take your savings, but you know, maybe we'll give you a few more months. I'm sorry, this is just not compatible with any vision of a collective humanity. And as we celebrate the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, as we celebrate the importance of and prepare for the big summit that the UN will have next year in 2021 for food security, I think we can come armed, not just with the science and the knowledge and the economics, which we are all well equipped to do, but also with the sense of our common humanity and how it is outraged by so many things that are going on that are wrong. I hope that this panel has been a small step in that direction. And I thank you each and every one for having participated. And I look forward to working with you on many other occasions in the future to advance our common agenda, an agenda of our common humanity.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Well said.
Bye-bye. Thank you.